What's going on, guys? Three Amigos podcast. Chris back here flying solo because I got to talk about this Roman Reigns, Sami Zayn, end of the Royal Rumble main event angle. There's just so much. This was like off the top of my head, one of the greatest segments slash match conclusions slash pay-per-view conclusions that I've ever seen in wrestling. And, I've been following wrestling for probably like a good 10 years or so, super consistently, and maybe like since I was a kid, so it's been a while. But this was just, I don't know how to say it other than perfection. I knew when Frankie told me that the men's match opened the show, the men's Royal Rumble, that there was going to be something crazy happening to end this pay-per-view. And Triple H has done a really amazing job. Like, this man knows how to end a show. Most of the pay-per-views that he has booked have ended with something crazy happening, some sort of parting shot that you remember. And this was honestly redefining, I think, what a pay-per-view can be, because the best part of this entire show wasn't the wrestling. And there's just so much, like, in the moment, it's coming. They've teased Sami being kicked out of the Bloodline for so long now, and especially recently in the last like week or two. But it's one of those things, like, me personally, I just didn't want this to end ever, because I thought the segments were so good. I thought they were so funny. I thought there's just this element of it that feels so real, which is crazy, because like there are certain angles in wrestling where the people behind the scenes are like really good friends, or maybe they actually hate each other, like Edge and Matt Hardy, or there's some sort of like genuine, John Cena, CM Punk, like, heat behind the scenes type of thing. But a lot of times it's like, oh, they're all friends, Gargano and Ciampa, Cena and Orton, that kind of stuff. But this is so insane because of what a like bizarre storyline it is, in the sense that like the Sami stuff feels like it was a meme that just started, like, ended up becoming so popular that whatever plans they had, I think they even said this, like Triple H said this, they just sort of like pivoted, and they were like, whoa, the Sami stuff is like starting to take off. We should like lean into it a little bit more. And it really, like, the character development in this entire angle from this specific moment, just, my God, it was so layered. It was so layered. Like, Kevin Owens getting beat up post-match. It's like, yeah, this is kind of what the Bloodline does. But the way they were doing it was just like a pack of hyenas, just beating this guy up. He was defenseless, like nobody else out there for him. At least potentially there was nobody else out there for him. We'll get to that. And it was just like, I think some of the best like wrestling beatdown angles are the ones that just make you uncomfortable to watch. And this was definitely one of those where it was like, man, I mean, and Kevin Owens is one of those guys who like actually doesn't mind getting like beat up for real, to really sell it. But man, what they were doing, like, they put the chair around his head. They do the big splash in the corner. This is after the spot in the match where Roman takes Kevin's head and like smashes it into the sharp side of the steps, which, I mean, I'm glad that Kevin Owens is like one of the best workers in the world, because that spot could have literally killed somebody, which, was really selling how brutal this match was. But there's this element of like, they faced each other before at the Rumble, and this whole beatdown felt like Roman was like, no, we're not going to do this again next year. We're not going to do this again in 2 years. You're never going to face me for this title ever again. And he was making sure that Kevin Owens would never want to step up to him ever again. And then they handcuff him to the ropes. And I mean, Kevin Owens really, I mean, he was like pretty beat up, like sincerely, but he's like stumbling, can't even stand up. He's like barely conscious. And then the Usos just start super kicking him over and over. These are like loud super kicks. Like, they are just pummeling this man. They're not missing these super kicks. These aren't going to the side of his arm, just to the face every time. They must have super kicked this guy like 15 times in a row. And he's just like completely limp on the mat, like can't stand up anymore. And then Roman like calls for the chair, picks it up. He's like shouting. Like there was another really great element of this is like they didn't have the announcers saying anything until later on in this segment as it was wrapping up. And so this is all off mic, like quote unquote off mic, which really just adds to the realism. Because it's like when these guys are holding microphones, it's like, yeah, you're cutting a promo. We're all wrestling fans. We're aware that like, you know, it's scripted and all that stuff. But like when the stuff is off mic, there's something about it, even with the cameras and all that, like there's obviously a cameraman in the ring. But like when it's off mic, there's something about it that just makes it feel like, you know, this isn't how it was supposed to go. You know, like this wasn't supposed to happen and it's all just like falling apart. And Roman picks up that chair and it's like, well, he's not really going to like hit him in the head, right? Like the way Kevin Owens is positioned, it's like, well, the only thing you could do is hit him in the head. And we know that's not allowed. But at the same time, like there have been a few instances where guys have done it anyway to like sell something. I think the last time was like Undertaker and Triple H, and they both got fined for it because they weren't supposed to do headshots. I think Batista got in trouble for like blading himself during a match when you weren't supposed to do that anymore. So occasionally guys will just do it. Like I could totally see a situation where Kevin Owens and Roman Reigns and Kevin's like, nah, man, just do it. Like hit me for real. Like we got to really make this look brutal. So, you know, you think it's not going to happen, but you kind of don't know for sure. And Sami, like once Roman raises the chair and Sami like steps in, he's like, bro, like chill. Like you've already, that you don't have to do this. Like, and then he's like appealing to the ego, like Roman Reigns, this guy who's been positioned as this like egotistical, like so full of himself. And Sami's like, you know, kind of knows what he's doing. So he's like trying to appeal to that. It's like, hey man, like it's done. Like he's out, like he's defenseless. You don't have to do this. This isn't something that the tribal chief would do. This is beneath you. He says this is beneath you. And you could tell like the acting in this segment, man. What Roman Reigns is doing with his acting, this is like elite level stuff because it's all acting. That's the crazy thing. Like we know there's not actually like really any like, you know, like sincere truth behind this. Like Roman doesn't hate Kevin Owens in real life like that. You know, there's none of that kind of stuff, but it just all felt so real. And you could tell like when Sami's like, hey man, this is beneath you. And it like really is like Roman's like, yeah, you're right. Like I'm the shit. Like I don't have to do this kind of stuff. Like I got a whole team of people to do this kind of stuff for me. And he hands him the chair. And like I thought what was so interesting about what happens next is that Roman didn't think it was gonna happen because he's the one that gave Sami the chair. Like this whole idea of who trusts who and who's loyal to who in the bloodline. But like, it wasn't that Sami ran out of the ring to get a chair to beat up Roman Reigns. It was that Roman Reigns genuinely thought if he handed the chair to Sami Zayn, that Sami would use it on Kevin Owens. And like handing over the instrument of your own destruction is just, it's so, it's going to sound so corny, but it's like so poetic. And I just, man, that image of him holding the chair up to Sami, be like, you do it, man. And Sami like, and oh, God, I got to point this out, but like, obviously there's a whole bunch of like parallels to the Shield stuff, and Roman has really got to stop turning his back when people behind him are holding chairs. But like the first time, the way they framed the shot, it's like Sami's holding the chair and he like backs up a little bit, and then Roman comes a little bit closer. And so you see there's like, for a second, the crowd's like, oh, is he going to do it? And like, then Roman turns around like just in time, almost like red light, green light. He turns around. He's like, oh, Sami's like, whoa, just trying to get my strength to do this. And Roman's like, hey man, like hurry up, you know, like this is it. Like this is what we're here to do. And he turns around again, and Sami like holds up the chair real quick and then puts it down. Roman turns around again. And they're like, man, talk about having the crowd just like sitting on the edge of their seats, which is exactly what I was doing. Like, is what we think is going to happen? Is it actually going to happen? Is it time? And that third time, like Roman gets real close to Kevin. He's like talking about all this and, you know, how the bloodline have made Sami, and, you know, Kevin Owens has been dragging Sami down since the very beginning, which is, technically not wrong. Kevin Owens turned on Sami Zayn a lot, beat him up a lot of times, and Sami just fine. And then he turns around and he's like, "What's wrong with you? Are you crying?" And Sami's like, "I'm not crying." Clearly, tears streaming down his face because he doesn't want to do this. And Roman is like pushing him, and then there's like this brief second where Sami like gets really mad, and there's like a face to face, nose to nose, and it's like 1 second, and then Sami turns away because he's scared, because he's like, it's similar to what we saw with Jey Uso. It's like he wants to stand up to him, but he just doesn't know if he can actually do it, and he knows if he does, he's probably going to be doing it on his own. And that was another aspect of this segment that I loved, was that Sami did what he did knowing full well what was going to happen to him if he did it. And I just, like, from a storytelling perspective, to have all of this so layered of, like, he knows if he picks up the chair and hits the head of the table, like, it's over. They're going to just destroy him. They're going to brutalize him. And, it's like there's this shattering of the image of the bloodline of what Sami thought they were. And, like, in this moment, he's realizing, like, they're just a group of thugs. Like, they're just a bunch of bullies. They're not my family. They never were my family, except for Jey, who those two, through everything ended up forming a very tight bond in this storyline. And it ends up playing out after, because once Sami hits Roman goes down, and, like, Roman got to sell him as a strong guy. So he's not even really physically injured as much as he looks at Sami and he's like, "Did you just do what I think you did?" Like, and you could tell, like, even Roman, who maybe, like, jokingly went along with the Sami Uso stuff because he could see it was, like, bothering Jey and he just wanted to mess with Jey. But he, like, genuinely thought everything was kind of good, or at least, like, Sami would fall in line. And, like, a couple seconds after that chair shot, boom, super kick from Jimmy. Solo pounces on him. Everyone's beating up Sami Zayn in the ring. Kevin is still knocked out. And, like, as Jimmy and Solo are beating up Sami, Roman's just on his knees, like, "This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Like, we all trusted you. You were family." Like, there's so much emotion in this. Like, and Jey just sitting in the corner, like, doesn't really know what to do. And it's funny because, like, this storyline, I think what's making it unique is that, like, depending on how long you've been following the Bloodline stuff, what's happening right now has different significance to different people, because Jey Uso is the one that basically started the Bloodline. Like, Roman came back and was acting like a huge bully, and Jey came back and stepped up to him and was like, "This isn't you. Like, what are you doing? Like, we're family. This isn't the Roman that I grew up with." And Roman just, like, beat him into submission. Like, everything that they just did to Kevin Owens, everything that they just did to Sami Zayn, Jey Uso is, like, sitting there seeing what happened to him. Only, he's, like, having an out-of-body experience. Like, he's seeing what Roman does to people who, like, disobey him, who don't fall in line. And it's exactly what Roman did to him, like, 3-4 years ago, which was a great, like, storyline briefly until Vince just got bored and decided to forget it. But there was several months there between Jey and Roman, and being beaten in the Bloodline, Jimmy coming back, trying to protect Jey, who was trying to stand up to Roman, but the problem has always been that there just haven't been enough people to stand up to Roman. It's been individual, one person who's just not as big, not as strong. And, Jey rolling out of the ring and walking away. And, like, you could see, like, maybe some people are disappointed he didn't get involved and, like, protect Sami. But he just tried to protect Sami, like, a few days ago when they were about to literally do the same thing to him and kick him out of the Bloodline. And Jey was the only person that did anything to stop it. And so the fact that he was the only person that didn't get involved here, and, like, I think now what's also making this great is, like, if they had all beaten up Sami, then this story would feel a little less layered, a little more one dimensional. And like, that's not what it's been recently. It's literally been so incredibly like complicated. There's all these little like intertwining motivations and emotions involved. And like, now there's a crack. Like there's a genuine crack in this group that's just been like dominating SmackDown and Raw for years. Well, I guess like, you know, the Bloodline stuff is, I guess, fully formed, maybe like 6 or 7 months. But like, you know, Roman being just a huge bully, that's been like years now. I mean, there have been like entire episodes of Raw where the Bloodline's just on the show beating everyone up. Just like, doesn't matter who they are, they're just beating them up. And like, there's just so much of this. There's like an element of, I mean, we got to talk about the pop, right? Like where Sami, as soon as he hits Roman with the chair, that's one of the loudest pops. I think it's just the straight up the loudest wrestling pop I've ever heard. Like I've seen a lot of people kind of talk about this segment as if like this is one of the best. This is, you know, top whatever, top 5, top 3. And personally for me, outside of Ciampa turning on Gargano, and that was a big crowd reaction. And then you're looking at like wrestling return pops, which is, you know, if you're gone for a long time, like I think even Dolph Ziggler got like a pretty big pop when he came back after some time off. But I don't remember any angle where there was a pop like this. This like was blowing out audio equipment. It was like distorting the audio for people that were watching. Like it was like rabid. Like the fans just lost their shit. They were like going absolutely insane. But from chair shot to crowd pop, the like half second, absolute insanity. They're like lucky people didn't like fucking jump the barricade and start rushing the ring and like holding Sami up on their shoulders. Like, but like that's where it feels like that's where this is headed. And it's so organic. It like started out probably as kind of a silly, like short thing they were going to do, and has now turned into this guy becoming essentially is like right on track to become the biggest babyface maybe ever. I mean, certainly like very close to eclipsing Daniel Bryan if things go the way that they potentially could. And it's just crazy. Like when he raises that chair and hits Roman, there's like these elements of like, you know, the school bully and how nobody would stand up to the school bully. And finally one person does. And it's like all these other people that have had their lunch money taken and like been beaten up in the schoolyard. And they're all like, hell yeah, man. Like, fuck that guy. Like beat his ass. And it was just like this visual too of like Sami Zayn is like not a big guy. Like he's an amazing wrestler, obviously. But like, you know, in like the Vince McMahon era of like what we, you know, people who watch a lot of WWE have been conditioned to see is like these like huge jacked dudes. And like anyone who's like, you know, scrawny or skinny or shorter or whatever is like supposed to be seen as just inferior in all aspects of wrestling. And so this like this side by side of someone like Sami Zayn, him being the one to stand up to Roman, right? It wasn't Solo, who's like, you know, pretty big. It wasn't The Rock, you know, who's probably the largest man in the universe. Like it was Sami Zayn. It was someone who's not even really a family member. Like it's just this like guy who couldn't watch it happen anymore. And it's like these elements of like Sami seeing what they're doing to Kevin, but you know, if you play it back through his mind, Sami's seeing what he's done to other people as he's tried to become part of this bloodline, which he thought was his friends and his family, but it's really just this gang, this group of thugs that just bullies people until they fall into submission or until they stop trying to challenge the head of the table. And it's like wrestling storytelling at its absolute most perfect version. And we've said for a long time, like when we've talked about the Bloodline stuff on this show, and like they have so many directions they could always go with this story. Every single turn, they've had so many options for where they could go with it. And none of them are really bad ideas, which I think has really helped a lot because there aren't that many things they could have done this whole time to really screw this up. Like if you're someone booking this angle who's like committed to seeing it pay off, there's really not much you could do to screw it up at this point. But I do think they have now sort of backed themselves into a corner, although it might be on purpose. Like, the idea of thinking that they backed themselves into a corner, it's like, well, you didn't back yourself into a corner if it's the place you want it to be. Like, because now it has to be Sami versus Roman. Like, I love Cody Rhodes. I love the American Nightmare gimmick. Cody's always been a super talented wrestler. He deserved to win the Rumble. The Seth Rollins match where his freaking pec was torn in half or whatever. Like, he absolutely deserves to win it. He deserves to be champion. It deserves to be a top champion. But you booked an angle, you booked a storyline where the stage is set. Like, you're looking at, I mean, you want to talk about merchandise, you want to talk about just like TV ratings. This is it. Like, Sami Zayn's the guy. Sami versus Roman is the program. And I don't know how they're going to do it, but they really haven't done anything wrong so far. So this idea of like, well, if they don't do it at Mania, like, they're going to screw it up. I was like, why would they screw it up? They haven't screwed it up yet. And like, I mean, I don't want to say they're playing with house money because they got to stick the landing, but like, this is going so well now that like now you've almost bought yourself an opportunity to like falter like once or twice. But like, I don't even see that happening because this has been thought out for so far. Like, even when you saw the Tribal Court, Paul Heyman pulling clips from like months ago of like stuff that they did, and they're like, oh, let's use that later on. So like, we don't even know how far in advance they have booked this story to go. Like, and there have been instances in NXT storylines where Triple H was trying to book crazy long-term storytelling of like Ciampa and Gargano, and then Ciampa gets hurt or Gargano gets hurt, and then you have to kind of like throw something in. So I think there is a potential where they're positioning Jay as a backup plan, because a story like this would be crushed from an injury, like a significant injury. Like, someone could be out for like a month or a few weeks or whatever. But if Sami Zayn got injured and was just out for 6 months, like, normally that would totally screw up the story. But there's an instance where you could insert Jay into that spot because the crowd was hot for Jay too. Like, and there's even, honestly, like, technically there's more there with Jay than there is with Sami, because Jay was at the start of all this. Like, he'd been beaten in a submission before. He didn't want to join the Bloodline. And he probably wouldn't have if Jimmy hadn't, gone out and tried to save him from so many of those beatdowns. It's amazing. As a wrestling fan, there's a part of me that feels like it's nice that it's like safe to get invested in a storyline, like that someone's not going to get bored after a few weeks and be like, never mind, we're not going to do this anymore. Like, if you've been watching this story for the last 3 years, for the last year, 6 months, whatever, like, you're being rewarded for getting invested. Like, I mean, the outpouring of reactions people have had to this post-match angle is just so cool to see. And it's really redefining what a pay-per-view could be. Like, Triple H has tried this before. He's done, and lots of companies have done this, but he's done this before where like the show's technically over and then he books like a crazy angle before it goes off the air. But he's never done it to this extent. Like, this was a full, like, 15 minutes of like just non-wrestling related storytelling that absolutely like sucked everyone completely in, and people just like so invested in what was going to happen, how this is all going to play out, thinking we sort of maybe knew but not being sure. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we live for as wrestling fans. And I know that Elimination Chamber is the next up and it's in Montreal. And I think they could do an Eddie Guerrero situation where they have him, they have Roman lose. I think Roman's never going to straight up lose a match. Like, it's going to be shenanigans. But at the same time, I think that's, that's how Eddie won the title too. Like, sometimes that's, if the other person in the match is over enough, no one's going to be annoyed if there's like a screwy reason that, somebody won or lost. But it does feel like that this needs to be the next match. I also did want to say, like, and I don't know what they're going to do on Monday, because there's literally only one thing that people are going to want. Like, expanded upon, which is how this show ended. But I'd be really tempted to keep Sami off TV for like a couple weeks. Like, I don't know when Elimination Chamber is, so maybe they don't have enough time for that. But I think if you do that, you almost like get the fans really riled up. Like, every time Roman comes out, every time someone from the Bloodline comes out, it's going to be Sami chants all around the arena. They're not going to want to see anyone else. Like, I think you're probably going to keep him off the show on Monday. I think maybe you see him on Friday. I don't know how they're going to do this, but I love that they probably already know. And I love just being along for the ride. And this was just such an emotional, like, I almost teared up watching Sami rear back and just fire that chair into Roman's back. It just, everything about this was perfect. And boy, as wrestling fans, we have a lot of times where we complain about a lot of stuff. And most of the time when Vince McMahon is involved in it, it's pretty justified complaints because he does a lot of dumb stuff. But I've seen other people say it, and I have no notes on this. This was absolute perfection. I just wanted to say too, like, the storytelling matches that Roman has during this Bloodline like storyline are fantastic. Like, again, it's sort of redefining what you are looking for from like wrestling, or like a wrestling show as a wrestling fan, because he's good. Like, Roman's good. He's always been good. His heel stuff has made him even better. Kevin Owens, obviously, again, always been really, really good. But Roman's not there to have like NXT takeover matches. He's not there to get 5 stars. He's there to like continue the storyline of this guy who's technically hasn't been beaten, but he's been pinned without a referee in the ring a lot. He's been presented as beatable, and he just has this crew around him that always have his back to make sure he doesn't lose the title. But there was an element of this beatdown that sort of felt like, it's always been about the numbers. It's just been that Roman always has the advantage. But this exact beatdown could have happened to Roman. Like, they've got the numbers. There's more of him than there's more Usos. They could do this to him. They just don't have the courage to stand up to him, or they think they need him even though they don't. And that just makes this so much better, because Roman's been presented as a very arrogant character who thinks he knows all the outcomes, who thinks he's like playing 4D chess, steps ahead of everyone. And Paul Heyman is honestly probably fed into that, because Paul always liked to talk about how he knows the outcomes and it's a spoiler and all that stuff, and how smart his clients are. When in reality, he's just a hype man. He's just hyping him up. He's just feeding his own ego and lining his pockets. And like, there's so much here of like what happened in this beatdown. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like this beatdown could foreshadow the future, but it also tied into the past and then the present of what was happening to Sami and Kevin. And it's just a magical moment. And there's a part of me that feels like this is kind of a once in a lifetime thing, because when you have people talking about like top 3, top 5 moments on a pay-per-view, or a single post-match angle making a match 5 stars, I don't even know how you would like evaluate from a ratings perspective, because it feels like you can't evaluate the match and not include the post-match, which would have to make it a 5-star match, because this was absolute perfection. But it's just like, there is an element of redefining kind of what we think wrestling can be or should be, or what it has the potential to become. And this was just such a magical moment that I don't know how many of these kinds of storylines we're going to get just across every wrestling company. Stuff like this doesn't happen very often. There have been club breakups, Bullet Club's broken up a bunch of times, Evolution, the Elite, the Young Bucks, Adam Cole, Hangman, all that stuff. There's been breakups before, but I don't know if we've seen a story like this ever. It's certainly not in a very long time. And the investment from the fans, the investment from the wrestlers in this storyline. Like, if you don't think they're having the best time of their lives, this is just absolutely magical from top to bottom. And I had to get these thoughts out because I've been thinking about this for a full day now, and I just wanted to talk about it because I love wrestling, and I think that this is now unlocking like an aspect of wrestling that I always loved, but I've never seen it done this well before. And it's really made me like think further about just like, yeah, it doesn't always have to be in the ring like some, or, I mean, this was in the ring, but it doesn't always have to be like, a crazy NXT takeover match, which are, matches I love, or New Japan or AEW. Like, sometimes the best thing in wrestling can be non-wrestling related storytelling. And when it's done this well, I mean, keep it going, because I'm all in. I've been all in. We've all been invested in this for a really long time. And to see it start to pay off the way it did at the Royal Rumble, this is something special. Thank you guys for listening, watching, wherever you found us. I appreciate you. Talk to you guys in the next one.